The wind rolled low across the prairie, like it had something to say but didn't know how to say it gently, rattling the loose boards of the lonely ranch house that stood miles from the nearest town. Its paint faded the color of old bones under the sun, and inside that house lived a man the world had mostly forgotten. Or maybe he had forgotten the world first. His name was Caleb Harlan, though no one had spoken it out loud in months, and the silence around him had grown so thick it felt like another layer of skin. He rose before dawn every morning, not because he had anywhere to go or anyone waiting, but because sleep brought memories. He could no longer outrun memories of laughter once echoing through these same walls, of a woman humming while she cooked, of a child's boots thudding down the porch steps, all of it gone now, buried beneath years of dust and loss. Caleb moved through his days with the careful precision of a man afraid that if he stopped, even for a moment, the weight of everything he'd lost would finally crush him. He spoke only when necessary, usually to his horse, and even then his voice came out rough and unused, like a door that hadn't been opened in too long. That afternoon, the sky hung low and gray, threatening rain that never seemed to come, when he found her near the creek, small, shaking, kneeling in the mud, as if the earth itself had rejected her and she didn't know where else to go. At first, he thought she was a trick of the light or a ghost pulled from his regrets, because no one came out this far unless they were running from something or someone. She looked up when she heard his boots, her eyes wide and dark with fear, her hair tangled and wet, her dress torn at the hem. And in that instant, Caleb felt something stir in his chest that frightened him more than the rifle slung over his shoulder ever could. He should have turned away. He knew that. Lonely men had no business getting involved in broken souls. But when she tried to stand and nearly collapsed, instinct overrode caution. He reached out, steadying her, and she flinched so hard it was like she'd been struck. "Easy," he said, the word coming out softer than he expected. And that was when she whispered it, barely a breath, barely sound at all. "Please don't." Those two words hit him harder than any fist ever had, because they carried a history of pain he didn't need explained. He slowly pulled his hand back, raising it to show he meant no harm, and for a long moment they just looked at each other, two wounded creatures measuring the risk of trust. She told him her name was Eliza, though the way she said it made him wonder if it had once belonged to someone else, someone who'd been lost along the way. She wouldn't say where she'd come from, only that she couldn't go back, and Caleb didn't push, because he understood that kind of silence. He brought her to the ranch, keeping his distance, offering food and water like fragile peace offerings, watching as she ate, like someone who hadn't known when her next meal might come. That night, rain finally fell, drumming against the roof while Eliza sat near the fire, her knees drawn to her chest, eyes fixed on the flames, as if they might tell her what came next. Caleb stayed on the other side of the room, pretending to mend tack that didn't need mending, aware of every sound she made, every shallow breath, every time she startled at a crack of thunder. He told himself she'd leave in the morning. People always did. But when he woke before dawn and found her still there, asleep on the bench by the fire, something in him cracked open just enough to let hope leak in. And hope, he knew, was the most dangerous thing of all. Days passed, then weeks, and Eliza slowly began to exist instead of merely survive. She helped where she could, moving carefully, like the world might punish her for taking up space. And Caleb found himself listening for her footsteps without meaning to, found the silence less heavy when she was near. Yet every time he thought they were growing closer, something would flash across her face, a shadow of fear, a memory too sharp, and she'd pull away, whispering those same words again when he came too close. "Please don't." And each time he obeyed, even though it tore at him, because the last thing he ever wanted was to become another reason for someone to be afraid. He didn't know it yet, but the storm that had driven Eliza into his life wasn't done with either of them, and the quiet loneliness of the prairie was about to be broken in a way that would test everything he believed about himself, about redemption, and about whether a man as broken as he was had any right to protect someone else. The trouble arrived the way it always did in the West, quiet at first, almost polite, riding in on the backs of men who smiled too easily and looked at things like they already owned them. And Caleb knew something was wrong the moment his horse spooked near the corral, and Eliza froze mid-step, her face draining of color as if she'd seen a ghost crawl out of the dirt. She didn't scream or run. She simply whispered it again, softer than ever, like a prayer that had failed her too many times already. "Please don't." And that was when Caleb understood that whatever she had fled from had finally found her. 3 men rode up slow, dust curling around their boots as they dismounted, their eyes scanning the ranch, lingering too long on Eliza before flicking to Caleb with open calculation. The one in front spoke like he was doing them a favor, saying they were looking for a woman who'd wandered off from where she belonged, saying her name like it was a debt owed, not a person's identity. Caleb stepped forward without thinking, placing himself between them and Eliza, feeling something old and dangerous wake up in his chest, something he'd buried along with his grief. He told them no one like that was here, his voice steady even as his hands trembled, and when they laughed, it wasn't humor, it was entitlement. They called Eliza by another name then, one she flinched at like a blow, and Caleb saw the truth settle in her eyes. There would be no hiding anymore. She told him everything that night, after the men rode off, promising to return. Her words coming in broken pieces. How? She'd been sold as a girl to pay off someone else's sins. How kindness had always come with a price. How every touch had taught her fear, and how she'd run not because she thought she'd survive, but because dying free felt better than living owned. Caleb listened without interrupting, his jaw tight. Fists clenched so hard his nails bit into his palms, and when she finished, she waited for him to look at her the way everyone else eventually had, like something damaged beyond saving. Instead, he surprised them both by sitting down on the floor a careful distance away, lowering himself so he wasn't towering over her. And he said the only thing that mattered, "No one owns you here." The men came back at dawn, just as the sun painted the sky red like a warning. And this time, they didn't bother with smiles. Guns were drawn, threats spoken plainly, and Eliza stood behind Caleb, shaking so badly she could barely breathe, whispering, "Please don't," not for herself, but for him now, because she knew what men like that did to anyone who stood in their way. Caleb felt fear, real fear, but beneath it was something stronger, a purpose he hadn't felt since the day he lost his family. He told Eliza to go inside and lock the door, and when she hesitated, he turned just enough to meet her eyes and nodded once, and she obeyed, tears streaming down her face. The standoff was fast and brutal, dust and gunfire and shouting tearing through the quiet morning, and when it was over, 2 men lay wounded and retreating, and one lay still in the dirt, staring up at a sky he'd never see again. Caleb stood there shaking, the weight of what he'd done settling into his bones, knowing the law would come, knowing there would be consequences, but also knowing he'd make the same choice again without hesitation. When Eliza came out, she ran to him before she could stop herself, pressing her forehead against his chest, her hands clutching his coat like it was the only solid thing left in the world. And for the first time, when she whispered, "Please don't," it wasn't fear, it was grief. Release and relief all tangled together. He didn't hold her right away. He let her choose. And when she finally wrapped her arms around him, it was gentle, tentative, real. The days that followed were uncertain. Questions from the sheriff, whispers from town, but Eliza stayed. And Caleb found that the ranch no longer felt like a graveyard of memories, but something living again.
She learned to laugh softly.
He learned to speak more than a few words at a time. And though scars remained on both of them, they stopped defining every breath. One evening, as the sun sank low and the prairie glowed gold, Eliza stood beside Caleb on the porch and said she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him, not of the world. And Caleb realized that loneliness hadn't been his punishment. It had been the space waiting to be, filled by something earned, something chosen. Out there in the wide, unforgiving West, 2 broken people had found a way to stand together without owning, without begging, without whispering, "Please don't," ever again. If this story moved you, If you felt the tension, the pain, and the quiet hope of the Wild West, subscribe to the channel for more powerful frontier tales of love, loss, and redemption. Your support keeps these stories alive.